a seasoned litigator, well-respected attorney at Patton Boggs and Latham, also counsel to former Deputy Attorney General and now current Attorney General Eric Holder. We need to watch what we do around here. We had a bunch of former top cops roaming the social media day today. But also, we had politicians up here, and our guest this afternoon is not a politician, but he won unanimously on the first ballot in 2009 when he was elected president of the NFL Players Association, a proud father of two who still coaches his children's sports teams. I am very, very proud to bring to you DeMaurice Smith, head of the NFL Players Association.
Hey, man. Thank you again. Thank you. Hey, good afternoon. How are y'all? Hey, I'm used to locker rooms, so good afternoon. Good afternoon. Excellent. I am used to locker rooms, but this smells a heck of a lot better. Look, it was a pleasure to not only come here today. I wanted to thank Pete Snyder and certainly the folks at NMS, not only for the invitation today, but I am actually convinced that one of the reasons, indeed, we are playing football is thanks to the hard work from the folks at NMS and certainly the folks in our own communications department. So George Atala, Jelaine Rogers, Mike Donnelly, who is here. Those were the people who committed themselves to not only pushing us through this collective bargaining process, but most importantly, putting us in a position where we could effectively negotiate a new collective bargaining agreement. So I know that there are a lot of football fans. I'm a football fan. But I want to take you back to December of 2008. We were still playing football then. I still had a nice, comfortable, non-public job at a firm called Patton Boggs where I enjoyed every moment of my day, and the best part of it was my kids did not see me on ESPN, my parents didn't see me on ESPN, and there weren't people following me around with cell cameras asking me crazy questions about the collective bargaining agreement. But in 2008, I had been contacted by a search committee with the idea of coming up with a group of candidates to see whether or not they would ultimately lead the players in this fight that was upcoming. So we brought together a group of lawyers that I work with at the firm and a man named George Atala, who's now the head of our communications department. We sat in a bar in Georgetown. If there's any lawyers out in the room, you know why we were at a bar, because I've already told you that I was a partner in a law firm. And we decided that we needed to take a very careful look at what would happen if we were fortunate enough to be able to represent the players, but knowing that on the horizon, the owners had already locked or walked out of the collective bargaining agreement. They had decided that they were not going to extend the agreement for another year. So everyone in 2008 knew that, in all likelihood, a lockout was on the horizon, and something that was equally important. The history of labor strife between the players and the owners was not a particularly successful picture from the standpoint of the players. In fact, if you remember back, some of you, there was a strike in 1974, there was a strike in 1983, there was a strike in 1987. All of those periods of labor unrest, I think you could fairly argue, were not successful outcomes for the players. So in 2008, knowing that the mother of all labor wars was about to begin, a group of us sat in this bar in between drinks talking about what would we do to change the outcome from what it had been historically. And it's very easy to start with the idea that we will just do things differently. We will have better messaging. We will have a better understanding of the metrics of measurement. We'll do a better job of having our players communicate. We'll do a better job of connecting with the fans. All of that all of those things are things that are worthy goals. I'm not sure any of those things is the answer of how are you going to proceed against a, let's be blunt, enemy. And at that point, the enemy was the owners of the National Football League, who had engineered a plan to lead us to a lockout, use the lockout for what it is in labor wars, namely a way of denying employees what? Salary and benefits in order to have an advantageous position in bargaining. So it is a fundamental position that we look at the lockout not as a simple neutral tool, or look at a strike as a simple neutral tool. The lockout engineered by the owners, the lockout that was prepared for by the owners, was designed to do one thing: to give them a substantial piece of leverage through bargaining. So as we sat there on that December evening, we started to think about ways in which the players historically have lost. And we came to one conclusion. They didn't necessarily lose the labor battles during the course of the labor battles. They lost the labor battles because, from a public relations standpoint, from a messaging standpoint, they were always in the position, at best, of being able to react as opposed to being in a position to dictate. And while all of those were lofty goals about how we were going to do things differently, the one answer that we consistently came back to was that we had to do the better job of using social media, not only to get to a point where we thought that we could at least engage with the National Football League on an equal playing field, but most importantly, we believed that we had to use social media as the only way to survive. To survive. Let's take a look. Okay, Mike said that I could point this everywhere. Can you play the Let Us Play ad?
Let us play.
Let us play.
Let them play.
Let them play.
We want to play. Let them play.
Let them play.
Let us play.
Let them play.
Let them play.
We want to play.
Let them play.
Let us play.
Let them play.
Let them play.
We want to play.
Let them play.
Let them play!
Simple message. A simple message that while we were always thinking about issues like whether we're going to play 18 games, what type of expansion is there going to be to California? Do we need a rookie wage scale? What's the fair share split of revenue? All of those things were minute, granular issues for us to decide during the course of collective bargaining. The real concern, however, was whatever our position was going to be on any of those issues, if we were not in the right position to at least be able to deal with the National Football League on an even playing field, we would never be able to effectively negotiate our way through those issues. So the Let Us Play campaign for us became one of the cornerstones of directly attacking the leverage that the league would attempt to use on it and use on us. Fight the lockout by letting us play. So in January of 2011, it is the last week of pro football. It's the week leading up to the Super Bowl. We agreed for the first time to sponsor something called the NFLPA All-Star Game. The idea being that we could be in the position of sponsoring an all-star game. But the real reason, or one of the real reasons why we were very interested in sponsoring an all-star game is because it was going to be shown on CBS, one of the major networks. The other piece of it was that what came along with us sponsoring that game was the opportunity to have 2 primetime commercial spots during Super Bowl week. So not only are you having the opportunity of taking advantage, taking control, and fighting against the main leverage weapon that the league is going to be using, what else do you now have? You will be using the National Football League stage to populate and push your message. So we move in for the first time in history, a labor union the size of the National Football League Players Association is going to use a social media campaign revolving around an ad that is going to be shown during the National Football League's greatest party. Things didn't work out. That was the ad as it was about to run. We started to pre-sell it on YouTube, building a fan base of the ad that was coming up. And lo and behold, this is what happens on January 30th, 5 days before the game is to be played. It's our all-star game. We're doing it. And CBS comes out and says, no, we're not going to let you show your ad. And the ostensible reason why they said they didn't want to show the ad is, I don't know if you can see at the bottom, we've made a decision that we don't want to become involved with labor negotiations. All right, that's fine. Of course, the dirty little secret was that CBS had already paid the National Football League nearly $1 billion in lockout insurance, even if the games weren't going to be played. So, of course, you already have a network who now is already what? Somewhat involved in labor negotiations. But you know what? We were stuck. We had committed a fair number of resources to a new idea. We had committed ourselves to this being the centerpiece of what we were going to do, using a mainstream or traditional television network to push our message, and again, most importantly, using the popularity of football, using the popularity of the NFL stage to get our message out during the last time that any fans would see a professional football game. The good news, it ultimately did not matter. And we're going to save that to the end. Why didn't it matter? But before we get to why it didn't matter, let's start with the history of where we are. Mainstream media, with respect to players in the National Football League and how they understood or portrayed labor strife, had historically been negative. This is an article during the course of the last strike, right after the strike ended when players crossed in 1987. A major newspaper with a headline, "Union Wants to Destroy National Football League." Well, you know, I never really apologize for being sometimes bombastic, but destroy? I mean, please. We do represent the players of the National Football League who actually earn their living playing the game. So a major newspaper taking the position that we would want to destroy the league is not only inflammatory, but think about the context. It doesn't matter now whether it's true or false. Someone seeing this, a fan seeing this, someone trying to make a split-second decision of whether they're going to back the owners or back the players, are going to instantly think from this that what is at stake? The nature of the game that they grew up with, the game that we love. And notice the careful choice of the words. There is no union without our players. But no one wants to say players want to destroy NFL, because why? That makes no sense. something amorphous or something that you can throw darts at, something that somehow is somewhat separated from the players, a union, that's what they want to use to destroy the game. Now, mind you, in 1988, the critical issues in the course of the strike was one thing: the absence of free agency. Curt Flood and others had led the fight for free agency in baseball. There was free agency in basketball. Football was the last sport in the world where you could be drafted by a team, and because of the Rozelle rule, you had no ability whatsoever to shop your wares to any other team. It actually quotes a general manager at the New Orleans Saints who makes the bold prediction that if the players' lawsuit goes through that came up after the strike, football as we know it will come to a screeching halt. That was 1988. Today, football is a $10 billion enterprise. There is free agency, and the last time I checked, ratings were pretty good. But nonetheless, this is the type of treatment among mainstream media networks during the course of the strikes. For example, in Buffalo at the same time, a local radio station came out and said that in its poll, 88% of the fans were against the players. In San Francisco, during the same time period, they said that newscasters and sportscasters mail was running 9-1 against the players. That's 99%. Now, the reality was that after the strike was over, the Harris Company was conducting a poll throughout the strikes. Their scientific poll came out and said that actually 43% of the people supported the players. 23% of the people represented or sided with the owners. But no one ever saw the Harris poll. No one ever learned that fans were actually behind the players for free agency. Why? Because every team wanted to win. Every fan wants to win. And back then, in that day, if you could get a player like Herschel Walker to come to your team, if you could get a player like Cornelius Bennett to come to your team, if you could get stars to come to your team, you had a better chance of winning. What fans hated was being stuck with an owner who didn't care whether he won or lost. Free agency became the thing that absolutely guaranteed one thing that we all love about football. It's a catchphrase we throw around every day. But no matter when fans wake up, they always think that what? Any given Sunday. Any given Sunday. And if there are Bills fans in this room, there are no group of people who believe better in any given Sunday than Bills fans today. Think about it. Where would we be if they were not able to grab a quarterback like Fitzpatrick? Not in any given Sunday. What we decided to do from a scheme of social media was to be in a place where we did not have to rely on traditional or mainstream media. So instead of waiting until we got to the lockout, instead of waiting until we got to a point where fans were being asked to make a choice between owners and players, instead of waiting to a point in time where newscasters and others who I'm sure are always neutral are going to weigh in on the issue of whether playing 18 games was a good idea for the players or not, or what was the fair share of revenue, or what we're going to do about health and safety of the players. Instead of waiting for those issues to be framed, we made the conscious decision to start to change the way in which our fans relate to our players and our fans understand the messages or the issues that were at play well before the lockout would have started. So when we started, and I showed you that Let Us Play campaign that was to kick off in January of 2011, The way in which we started our social media drive was the first game of the season in 2010. Everyone knew that the lockout was on its way, but nobody wanted to talk about it. So what did we do? On the first weekend of those games, we started talking to our players about what can you do as men, as businessmen in the business of football, to make sure that the fans understand that you as players will be somewhat different than the players of the past. What will you do to symbolize to everybody in America that this is not just a battle between what? Millionaires versus billionaires. How do you, as men in the business of football, relate to fans so that they know that you are fighting for something that is bigger than just how much you get paid? We made the decision that players, if they so chose, right before the game starts, that they would walk out to midfield, the other team would walk out to midfield, and they would not say a word. They would not stop the game. They would not engage in a strike. But before the game was played, they would simply turn to each other and demonstrate that they would be one. And for us, that became the defining moment in our use of social media. Why? Because for the announcers in the booth who didn't know what was going to happen, we don't need them to characterize it in any way. It's visual. For us who, while the National Football League puts on one of the greatest games, greatest entertainment spectacles, doing this, we did not need them to show any particular person any particular way. And most importantly, we didn't need someone to write a story about what the issues are. It became critically important for us to simply indicate in a forthright way that unlike the players of the past, Joe Montana crossed the line. Howie Long crossed the line. Tony Dorsett crossed the line. Randy White crossed the line. Roger Staubach crossed the line. Roger Craig crossed the line. All of those players in all of those previous strikes crossed the picket lines against their teammates, left their teammates on the picket line, and all of the previous strikes crumbled because of lack of support, lack of solidarity, and the lack of an effective way to use media and messaging to their advantage. So for us, it became critical at the beginning of this stage to not wait until the issue was framed. So we fast forward from the way the season started in 2010, we fast forward to where we start building our own social network strategies that are running outside of traditional or mainstream media, running at a faster pace, but equally important, just like those signs of solidarity, were direct contacts between our players, who our fans love, to the players who love them. So we built something called NFLlockout.com. Why did we choose Lockout? I would like to say that instantly it was a brilliant idea from yours truly. Mike will tell you that's not true, because mainly there's very little brilliant that comes out of my mind. The reality of it was we went through a number of different tags, a number of different ideas of what should we use? Should we use solidarity? Should we use unity? Should we use one? Should we use all sorts of things? Ultimately, we chose to use Lockout. Why? Two reasons. Lockout was the one thing that was going to take football away from our fans. Not a strike, lockout. Number two, By choosing lockout, we are now taking the very word and the very tool that management would be using against us, using it for ourselves. Anytime we can reach in and take something that your opponent thinks is a strength, and you now turn it into a weapon against him, that's a net win. So using NFLlockout.com, we started to build both online social media and network strategies through Twitter. We created a petition where fans could come on board and believe that they have an impact on whether or not football is going to be played. So again, contrast that with the Finks article, the op-ed that you saw earlier, where you're relying on the characterization of a writer to inform a fan of what he or she should do or think. The idea of building our own petition, relating to our fans on Twitter and Facebook, put our fans in the driver's seat where they now believed they could make up their own mind about which side to take. We ended up with, on our lockout.com page, 152,000 signatures. On our Facebook page, around 60 to 70,000. And on the day, 5 days before that ad was supposed to run, through a social media network led by Mike and others, we ended up in a world where the other hash that we were using, called Let Us Play, reached a trending point of number 4 worldwide on Twitter. Why was that important? Because leading into that Super Bowl, leading into that point where we had hoped that we would be able to show our ad, we are also realists. Knowing that CBS has a NFL contract with the National Football League, knowing that they had given the National Football League nearly $1 billion to play even if the games aren't played, how many people would be surprised if somehow CBS would make a decision not to show the ad? Not a surprise. But the reason why it ultimately did not matter was because we started to build that social media construct, driving those issues through non-mainstream media, and doing it in such a way where 5 days before the ad was to run, people like Larry Fitzgerald with 1.4 million followers, people like Reggie Bush with 1.3 million followers were tweeting, retweeting the issue of Let Us Play over and over and over again. This is my favorite headline from the entire saga. Actually, Greg Aiello and I are friends, but you know, every now and then you just can't give up a freebie. Where did we end up? Yes, we ended up in a world where we were able to effectively negotiate a new collective bargaining agreement. We ended up in a world where we were able to play on Sundays and on Mondays and on Thursdays. We ended up in a world where our players continue to be able to play the game that they love and most importantly, in a safer paradigm. But I am absolutely convinced that we would have never been in a position to negotiate those things effectively if we had not started off with the idea of using social media as a viable vehicle for change. And that is something that it took me a little while to be convinced of. But we had great folks who helped us. We had a tremendous plan that we were fortunate enough to execute. And anytime you end up at nearly the end of this process, where the lockout was about to take place, March of 2011, where one of the major newspapers in the country, at the time when the league is going to execute its most volatile strategy against you, the lead article is NFL entering Sheen territory. I dig it. digging. That's all I had. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
How did you have anything to say to the players about what they were tweeting or how they tweeted, similar to how we might be concerned about employees
Yeah.
saying something on the platform?
We did, and again, through trial and error, it became very difficult to manage what they were going to say. And I came to the conclusion that that was the wrong strategy. Because again, one of the great things about social media is its appearance of authenticity. So the more we tried to manage the actual words that came out of their mouth, the less what? Authentic it became. So instead, it became really a mission of educating our players on what the issues were. And what we found over a very short period of time, the issue of 18 games, while the league talked about that issue as what? Fans don't like the preseason. Our players talked about 18 games as a threat to their health and safety. When the league talked about players already get something like 58% of total revenue, our players knew that in reality that all revenue number was actually 50%. So instead of just giving them canned bites, it became much easier and frankly far more effective for our players to weigh in on issues on a substantive way. Mike and George were one of the first people to convince me about Ustream and web chats because, again, my background is a trial lawyer. If I can't have a group of people who are captive and stuck in a jury box and frankly can't get out, those are the people that I'm used to talking to in a very linear way. And as I'm fond of saying with a jury, the greatest thing about a jury is they can never talk back. Ustreams and web chats were the complete opposite for me. And the conversation about, okay, Dee, we want you to sit down in front of a computer and 10,000 people are going to be looking at your chat and any one of them can ask you a question and then you'll just simply have to respond. Really? It became a very, very interesting and organic way about talking about issues. And frankly, just to wrap up that piece, at the end of the day, web streams, Ustreams and web chats for me became a far more effective mode of conversation than ESPN. Why? Again, everyone's neutral. Everyone's objective. If I took an hour to set up an ESPN interview, their editors would make the decision about how many seconds of that interview is actually going to air, if it would air at all. The difference with a Ustream and a web chat was it was an hour of full conversation, and again, the added benefit, like everything else on the internet, it lives perpetually. So what we ended up finding was reporters on the mainstream side of things, when they wanted to find out the real issues, if they actually wanted to dig and try to understand the issues that we were dealing with, one of the things that would pop up in their Google search or their search would be an hour-long web chat where you actually have the opportunity to get into the issues. Yes, sir. I don't know if you heard the question. It was, I'll rephrase it, but are there any lessons learned and unlearned as we look at the NBA situation? I'm going to punt. I mean, look.
I'm going to throw a flag.
Nice. Okay, then I'm going to kick the ball out of bounds. You know, labor negotiations are, it'll be the understatement of the day, hard. And the most important factor in any of them, having gone through the bruising battle that we went through, was that while there was a history of the lack of player solidarity in previous NFL fights, there was no lack of solidarity in ours. And I don't care what issue you are dealing with, what technical, granular, substantive thing that you're fighting over. It is a leveraged battle between two significant forces. And if one of those forces is fragmented and unable to approach issues in a unified, systematic way, it gives a substantial advantage to the other side. Obviously, I spent some time with the NBA players, and I've told them nothing that I didn't tell you. They will rise and fall on their ability to stick together.
But are they using social media in any of the ways that you?
They are. Actually,
successfully did?
2 weeks ago, they actually used Let Us Play as a Twitter campaign. They have been, I think, very effective in something that we couldn't do. They have done a tremendous job of what I call from the old days barnstorming and taking their issues from town to town to town by playing pickup games and other things. Football players, we couldn't do that. But their ability to take their game, namely because you grab a ball and a rim, their ability to take their game out to their fans where they can actually meet touch, I think is a tremendous advantage that they have and something that's very, frankly, difficult, if not impossible, for us to do. Other questions?
I have a question. You mentioned, did you give the players any rules of the road regarding social media? I saw that you had tweets by Reggie Bush. Did you identify Reggie and a couple of some of the stronger personalities in the league to be the spokespeople? And did you give them any tips on how to script the message?
You know, to be dead honest with you, not really. It was important for our men, in my mind, that they understand where they are as men and as businessmen in the business of football. And I told you earlier that while I love them and frankly amazed at some of the things that they're able to do on a football field, as the executive director, I care more about how they carry themselves and how they either prepare or execute their responsibilities as businessmen in this fight. So instead of really reaching out to particular players, the message to all of them was, our success or failure is squarely on your shoulders, even more so than it is mine. When I was in I hate to call it a campaign, but we're under the consideration to be the executive director, I remember telling the folks in the room, if you're looking for one person to push this rock up the hill by himself, pick one of the other two dudes. Because the history of where you have been as a group of men shows that the lack of solidarity is a death shot for you. And as folks who know that we are starting off, another football analogy, third and long. I actually rarely use football analogies. I've run into all of them today. But as a group of players who started this process third and long. I mean, a group of owners who had $4 billion even if the games aren't played. Players who only play for 3.2 years. The threat of taking 1/3 of your earning capacity away from you by locking you out for a season for a year. I mean, that's even before you get to the point that they hired a former president of our union to work in their offices, and then hired another former president to basically divide us on the former player side. I mean, walking into this fight, there are any number of ways that one would have hoped that it would have been more balanced. The only difference was that I believe that our guys stepped up to the plate and took upon themselves the responsibility that they were going to carry all of this on their shoulders. So for guys like Reggie Bush and Larry Fitzgerald, or Kevin Mawai, or Tom Brady, or Kyle Orton, or Ryan Clark, Troy Polamalu, guys who made the decision on a particular day that even though they had never really been involved with their union or never really been involved with their players association, this was the challenge of their lifetimes. And they were going to be measured as men and as businessmen and as family men and as leaders about whether and to what extent they were going to rise to the challenge. You know, hearing that, that's what they did. And it wasn't so much a arm twisting or asking, because some of our young men paid a price for being leaders. Some of them lost their jobs, as people have in the past. But I was proud of them, not so much because we ever spent time telling them what to say. They stepped up and said, what can I do? And frankly, that's kind of cool.
This is kind of in follow-up, but aside from the lockout, what type of training or education do you do for the men in terms of their social media presence, whether it's building and not tarnishing or maintaining their own brand, but also their team and the association as a whole?
You know, with respect to the lockout and the labor fight, for lack of a better word, we spent time talking with them about what their responsibilities were. You know, at times did players call and they said, hey, you know, what is a good way to talk about X, Y, and Z? Are there things that I can do to be more effective? We got a few of those, but most of our young men are very, comfortable being interviewed. They figure out the world of being a public figure, I think, much faster than some politicians. Because they do live in a very weird public space. And this is why most of them start off with a very healthy skepticism about mainstream media. If we polled them, my guess would be that more of them are comfortable tweeting, doing an interview via video, doing a chat via Skype, or posting something on their Facebook. My guess is far more of them are comfortable doing that than giving an interview with a sports reporter. Why? Because all of them do something that, let's be blunt, humans can't do. We can't do what they do. That's why we dig it. But what happens on Monday? Yeah, Drew, it just seems to me that, you know, you missed that slant pattern on the left. It's Drew Brees. You can't do that. So they all live in this world where no matter the fact that they can do things that ordinary people can't do, on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, you have everyone in the country second-guessing what they do. So they tend to be very skeptical and insulated against that. And I think as a result, they're very, very authentic and real when they believe that they can control the actual message that's coming out. It's my guess. I was a philosophy major, not a psychology major. Any other questions?
D?
Yep.
You talked a lot about dealing with your veterans and keeping everybody unified. How'd you deal with the draftees and these rookies coming in who, you know, had been geared up for probably most of their adult life, thinking that this is going to be their time? How'd you educate and deal with them?
Spending time with them. Yeah, you think of a player like Von Miller, who not only is a tremendous young man, but drafted fourth. Vaughn made the decision even before he was drafted that he was going to lend his name to the lawsuit against the owners to try to block the lockout. When you have a young man like that who is willing to stand up for what he thinks is right, knowing that it might cost him a draft spot in the business that has been his dream since he was 6 years old, I don't have to spend a lot of time talking to him about what his obligations are. You take a guy like that and you have him go talk to young men like Cam Newton and Paul Peterson. So one of the things that I think that we were blessed to have was not only a group of strong veterans who committed themselves to engaging in a fight, and sometimes in a fight where they could have come to a conclusion that they didn't have to partake in, all of them made the decision that they were also going to be teachers themselves. So, look, there is nothing that a lawyer from DC is going to say in a locker room of football players that is going to get them unified and moving in one direction. I mean, I would love to say that that is who I am. It's not, and if you want any proof, simply ask my wife. What I can do is hopefully provide the idea of what our responsibilities are and what the vision should be. But from that point on, it was really guys like Larry Fitzgerald. It was men like Drew Brees. There's a slide that I didn't show you, but again, early on in the fight, back in 2010, Drew Brees, as he was headed into the playoffs, wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post calling the National Football League to task over a position that they were taking in an antitrust lawsuit that was frankly designed to crush our players' union. So here is a person who is playing the game not only at the highest moment, getting ready to play in the playoffs, but a quarterback who, frankly, has got most of his money that's guaranteed. He's playing at the height of his game. If anyone can remove himself from the rank and file player, it's a high-profile quarterback like Drew Brees. But nonetheless, it was a young man who decided that on this day, on this stage, he had an obligation to be a leader. And when someone steps up like that and writes that op-ed, which ended up being one of the most downloaded op-eds from the Washington Post of all time, he becomes a leader for everybody else. And that becomes a very fun thing to manage and watch. But the veterans, the rookies, all of them rose to the occasion. And for that, I don't care how good of a lawyer anyone is, if you don't have that, you lose. And you lose spectacularly. Any other questions?
Actually, one last one. How are my hashtag Eagles going to do? Are they turning it around?
Stop. Stop. I root for them all equally. Look, you know, I had the opportunity of almost, I guess within a month after I got elected, Michael had made a petition to come back into the National Football League. And I remember meeting him shortly after that while his petition was pending, just to talk to him about what his plans were. And I obviously won't go into detail about what we talked about, but again, juxtaposing, you know, where he was then and where he is now, there is I admit, I come from a long line of Baptist preachers, so you will get this part of me. There is something tremendous about the qualities of redemption and empathy. And the greatest thing about our guys is that fans like me, fans like you, get to watch them on Sunday do things that ordinary humans can't do, and you get to cheer and yell and clap. But every now and then, you get reminded about just how human they are. And he made a mistake. He paid dearly for it. But I'm proud of what he was able to do to step through that and move on with his career. And again, cool, pretty cool. Thank you all. Thank you very much.